This is something that should have us all holding out hope until the very, very last minute that President Trump can somehow eke out an election victory here. I still don't think there's any reason to concede before the electors vote. We should all be holding out hope because it's not just Joe Biden, though he's probably the greatest example of this. For decades, elite politicians in this country have sold us out to China. They've done it because they have a stupid political ideology that tells them that rising China is good for the world. That's why they let China into the World Trade Organization 20 years ago. It's why they've allowed China to steal our intellectual property. It's why they've allowed China to violate World Trade Organization treaties. It's why they've allowed China to illegally subsidize their steel and aluminum and manipulate their currency. The list goes on and on and on and on. Most importantly, they've allowed China to steal our jobs. And the argument for it is, oh, it's good for the world. If China gets more economic power, they'll liberalize their country. They'll become more democratic. They'll become more like America, and that'll be good for everybody. Obviously, that hasn't happened. The other reason is that China's just buying direct influence. You saw this with the Hunter Biden scandal. You've seen this with other American politicians. We now have experts on communist China admitting this kind of influence. There's a recently recorded lecture showing a Chinese Communist Party expert explaining how China has, quote, people at the top of America's core inner circle. This video has been leaked, made its way onto the internet and into the United States after it was censored in China. The person giving this lecture is Di Dongsheng. He's vice dean of the School of International Relations at Renmin University. My Chinese is not great, but my ability to read subtitles is. Take a listen to this. We know that the Trump administration is in a trade war with us. So why can't we fix the Trump administration? Why between 1992 and 2016 did China and the U.S. used to be able to settle all kinds of issues, no matter what sort of crises happened, bombing of the embassy, crashing of the plane? Things were resolved in no time, like a couple do with their quarrels. We fixed everything in 2 months. What's the reason? I'm going to throw out something a little explosive here. It's just because we have people at the top. At the top of America's core inner circle of power and influence, we have our old friends. For the past 30 years, 40 years, we've been utilizing the core power of the United States. Now, we know which people he's talking about here. Notably, he's talking about Biden, who's given speeches about this. He's given speeches about how great it is to empower China. He's gone on the record, but you've heard all the other kind of liberal establishment people talking about this as well. This sort of admission is so explosive that I didn't believe it, actually. This video was going all around the internet yesterday. I didn't believe it. But mainstream news outlets, not many of them, but some of them, are reporting on this because they have to. Because this is real. This is a real guy. He really is the vice dean of this IR school, and he's really talking about influence, Chinese influence in the United States. Hostile powers have often exerted influence in the United States. Right now, I'm reading Witness by Whittaker Chambers. It's one of the books that turned Reagan from a liberal into a conservative. It's from an ex-communist who details in painstaking detail all of the Soviet influence in the United States during the 30s, during even a little before that, and during the 40s. Guys who were at the very tippy top, guys who were helping to establish the United Nations, guys who were in the State Department, guys who were in the Justice Department, who were communist spies. And they had that. Soviet Union had that for a long time. When people make fun of McCarthyism or they make fun of the House Un-American Activities Committee, that's like the punchline now for a lot of people. What that fails to acknowledge is these guys were right. I mean, Joe McCarthy was a little bit of a flawed individual in the way that he carried these things out, no question about it. William F. Buckley Jr., founder of National Review, wrote one of his first books defending Joe McCarthy because the central thesis here, that the Soviet Union had communist spies at high levels of the government, was obviously true. We know this. We know their names. We know the name Alger Hiss. We know people who were, Whittaker Chambers called this out, McCarthy, I suppose, called this out, Nixon called this out, all made fun of, all mocked, all have been sort of written out of the history of that era. But it happened, and it's happening now with China. He goes on. Now that we're seeing Biden was elected, the traditional elite, the political elite, establishment, they're very close to Wall Street. So you see that, right? Trump has been saying that Biden's son has some sort of global foundation. Do you notice that? Who helped him build the foundations? Biden's son. Got it? There are a lot of deals in all these. Who helped Hunter Biden build the foundation? Who do you think? Who do you think? China. This guy points out very astutely that Wall Street used to exert a lot of influence in the United States. And then after the financial crisis, 2007, 2008, Wall Street lost a fair bit of their influence. And they were sort of the bad guys because they plunged us all into this global recession. Still, the establishment was playing along. And then you had Trump. And Trump comes in and he offered a radically different policy at the domestic level, but also at the international level. Don't forget, from Bush 1, maybe even further back than Bush 1, but certainly from Bush 1, Clinton, Bush 2, Obama, the presidents changed, the parties changed, but the foreign policy more or less stayed the same, didn't change all that much. Our attitude toward China didn't change at all, really. It kept getting nicer and nicer and softer. Then Trump comes in and he says, no, what are you guys doing? But people make this mistake. They think Trump was elected because of his personality, because he said some mean things and made fun of Mika Brzezinski's face. Not so. Donald Trump offered a different policy agenda than did the other Republicans in the primary, and then did Hillary Clinton, and I suppose Joe Biden too. It was a different agenda, specifically with regard to our greatest geopolitical foe. This will be coming back if Joe Biden becomes the president, okay? This is going to raise a lot of security issues. When we think about national security, we're always talking about the Middle East or, terrorists coming over here. A far greater security issue will come from China. There is no reason to play nicely with China. China views us as an enemy and an adversary, and there is a political elite in the United States, now led by Joe Biden, that wants to deny that adversarial relationship. Got to keep security on our mind.